Now, China has announced it'll forgive 23 loans for 17 African countries. Its Foreign Minister Wang Yi pledged that China would continue to actively support and participate in the construction of major infrastructure projects across Africa through financing, investment and assistance. China is currently Africa's largest bilateral lender, and it's been suggested that the context of this latest relief reinforces China's intention for Africa to consider the Asian power its preferred long-term development partner. Specifics of the relief package are not known, and the beneficiaries and amount have not been disclosed. In 2020, China cancelled debt worth $113.8 million for 15 African countries, including Botswana, Burundi, Rwanda, Cameroon, the DRC, and Mozambique. Well, let's get more on this now from the international economist and political analyst Christian Udechukwu, who joins me in the studio. Good to see you, Christian. Do we know? Yeah, lovely to see you, mate. Do we know how much of these loans China is actually going to write off? What the value of them is?
Well, what we do know actually is that between 2001 2018. China's total loan disbursements to Africa was at about $126 billion. And FDI in that time was also about $41 billion. So what we're looking at perhaps, we don't know, as you just highlighted, we don't know the volume of the write-down or the write-off, but it is significant. And one of the things that you omitted to also say is that the 23 loans are interest-free.
Yeah, they are. Okay. Interest-free loans.
Interest-free loans.
Yeah.
So, it kind of excludes or precludes China from the debt trap diplomacy, which has been
accused of,
used as a smear on a largely significant benefactor for Africa on trade and investment globally. So what we do have now really is a sort of a waiting game to see who these beneficiaries are and what volume or quantum of debt is to be written off. But the total exposure for Africa to China is in the neighborhood of $126 billion presently.
That's a lot of money. And of course, these loans, we don't know whether these are loans that these countries are unable to repay.
Well, the challenge usually is that most of the people who engage in loan negotiations for most African countries, as has been established historically, is that they're poorly equipped. They have neither the capacity, the training, nor the skill sets to negotiate what is best for their countries. And the third thing also is that half the time the loans are not negotiated for facilities that have the capacity to repay itself within time frames. So, and that is what actually usually results to defaults without excluding corruption, which is rampant in most countries. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of developing the capacity of African countries to come up with loan requirements that have a clear timeline on repayment and that is timely, without room for default, and eliminating corruption totally in the chain. But China has been a paramount player in the African continent, voluntarily engaging in bilateral and multilateral discussions with African countries on infrastructure projects that are significant to them. And on the private sector side as well, there has been significant push. A lot of African Chinese OEMs are in Africa manufacturing a wide variety of goods and services and that go overseas for export, including America, through the AGOA program. So there's a significant engagement.
Right. But I mean, I should mention that in May this year, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres had urged debt relief for African countries after the challenge of the COVID pandemic. So it would seem that China is leading the way with that.
Well, yes. Also, given the intensity of global rivalry over Africa in the height of this Ukraine-Russia conflict and the emerging tensions in the Taiwan Strait, global relations are even more significant now. Managing global opinion of sovereigns are paramount. That is not to say that these gestures are not altruistic, because it has been happening on a regular basis. And I think that in terms of development, within the short span of the last 30 years, China has probably done more significant infrastructure development in Africa, which is visible. And trade between China and Africa has also significantly grown over the same period.
Yeah, but I'm going to raise a question that the West often raises. These countries that are benefiting from all this Chinese largesse, I mean, do they have to hand over anything, for instance, in exchange for this debt forgiveness?
No. That is the blunt truth. They don't have to. It is never willingly embedded in the contracts that there are strings of values, of interests attached. Trade loans are what they are, and investment loans are what they are. The challenge with how they are handled ultimately is a function for the state that is receiving the funds. I mean, we have our own local experiences here of scandals involving foreign loans and the management of the same. So it's perhaps one of those development issues that most nations need to build the capacity to manage.
Well, I mean, the reason I mention that is because China, as you hinted earlier, has been criticized by the West for what's being called debt trap diplomacy, where China would lend large sums of money to countries that perhaps could not afford to pay those loans back, and then they would, in a sense, be trapped and would have to do whatever China says. I mean, is this debt relief sort of thing, and that's the way the West is portraying it, is that an attempt to perhaps counter that criticism?
No. I think China is a free actor on the global stage. Charles, these geopolitical games are ongoing. They've been there since the origins of time, and they will continue. The institutions of the IMF World Bank were established by the Western Alliance primarily to provide development funds to nations and countries. And they've been similarly accused of the same thing. We had structural adjustment policies in Nigeria imposed by the West and through the institutions of the IMF World Bank, and it wreaked havoc on the Nigerian currency, and we haven't recovered from it since. So it's not, that for Nigeria at the time was because we were said to have been in the IMF World Bank trap. We couldn't repay our loans, and we had to manage our economies as was dictated by them.
Yeah.
We had to sell off state assets.
So it's a bit fresh of them to be talking about.
Absolutely. We had to sell off state assets to be able to repay our exposure to the West and, liberalize our economy so their products could come in more easily, allow a significant portion of the funds that they were lending to us to go back to their home countries for consultancy services that were being provided by consultants from the same Western countries. So the funds themselves at the time had very little impact in our domestic economies because the products that were to be the primary equipment or infrastructure, was to be built by them, and so the costings were also, from them, and the funds eventually stay in their home countries. And then what we then lack is the capacity to be able to leverage whatever was built here to generate sufficient capital to service the debt or ultimately pay it off. And it's something, they're not themselves malevolent institutions. Singapore, at its early stages, was able to borrow from the IMF and the World Bank to build what was the modern foundation for the city-state to become what it is today, but they paid back many years before the loans were due. And of course, they had strong minds and personalities who were able to get the best terms for Singapore. But whatever anyone who is a borrower agrees to do, which becomes part of the binding terms of a legal contract, it is beholden on the borrower to fulfill and perform to the specific terms of the facility that they've signed up to. So I wouldn't blame any institution really for any nation falling into what is now pejoratively called the debt trap. But it is something that has that most African countries have experienced from both Western and Asian lenders.
Right.
We just need to learn and find our way forward.
I love the way you put these things in perspective.
Thank you.
I love your mind.
Thank you. You're too kind, Charles.
And there's another guy I love his mind, Waziri Adia, who's going to be coming up in a minute. But let me say thank you very much, Christian Udechukwu, the international economist and political analyst, always putting things in clear perspective.